The first winter of the pandemic was the coldest Margaret had ever known, though the thermometer outside her kitchen window said otherwise. It wasn't the frost on the glass or the icy wind pushing against her door that made her shiver. It was the silence. Her days had become a loop. Wake at 7, put the kettle on, open the curtains to the same empty street, eat breakfast alone, lunch alone, dinner alone. She would sit in the living room in the evenings, hands folded in her lap, the television talking at her, but not to her. It had been 9 months since anyone had touched her hand. Before COVID-19, Margaret's life was small, but rich. She had tea with her neighbor Nora on Tuesdays, helped at the church bake sale on Fridays, and called her daughter Claire in the evenings. Now, Nora's house was dark, the church hall locked, and Claire's voice came only through the harsh metallic crackle of video calls when the internet didn't fail. Margaret told her daughter she was fine. She wasn't. The first sign of trouble came when she stopped bothering to cook. It was too much trouble to chop vegetables for one, to boil water for pasta when no one else would share it. She lived on crackers and instant soup. Weeks passed before she realized her skirt was slipping down her hips. Next came the sleep. She could fall asleep in her chair after breakfast and wake when it was dark again. The days blurred. Her body felt heavy, her chest sometimes tight, not from the virus, but from the weight of loneliness pressing into her ribs. She wasn't the only one. Across town, in a second-floor flat, Mr. Harold Benson had been a regular at the community center before it closed. He used to play chess with the same 3 friends every Thursday. Now his board gathered dust. He rarely opened his blinds, and the mail piled up behind his door. No one noticed when he stopped answering the phone. The isolation didn't just drain spirits, it weakened bodies. Without social visits or gentle nagging from friends, medication went untaken. Doctor's appointments were missed. People forgot to refill prescriptions or didn't bother. Margaret's friend Pauline, a widow in her 70s, suffered a stroke alone in her kitchen. It was hours before anyone found her, and by then, the damage was irreversible. Fear had built invisible walls around everyone. Margaret's neighbor across the street, a man in his 80s, refused to open his door when the grocery delivery arrived. He would wait until the driver left, then drag the bags inside, disinfecting each item. But his hands shook, and one day, the milk spilled all over the floor. He cried, not because of the mess, but because there was no one to help him clean it. For months, the news spoke only of infection rates, death tolls, ventilators. What it didn't count was the number of older people slowly fading, not from the virus, but from the long, aching absence of human contact. Their hearts kept beating, but their will to live ebbed away. Margaret noticed her memory slipping. She would walk into the kitchen and forget why she'd gone there. She'd put the kettle on, then forget it entirely until the room filled with steam. She tried reading, but the words refused to stick. She stopped answering calls from friends because she didn't know what to say anymore. By spring, she'd lost nearly 20 pounds. Her legs trembled when she stood. One afternoon, she tried to move the armchair to vacuum beneath it and found she couldn't lift it at all. She sat down on the couch and stayed there, staring at the wall, until the light faded. Claire called more often now, sensing something was wrong. "Mum, you need to get out, even if it's just a walk around the block," she urged. Margaret promised she would. But when she stepped outside the first time in weeks, the air felt too sharp, the world too large. She hurried back inside, shutting the door firmly. In late April, the news reported that the lockdown rules were easing. People were planning barbecues, shops were reopening. But for the elderly, especially those alone, nothing really changed. Their friends had grown frail in the months apart. Some were too scared to leave home. Others had died quietly, their names never linked to the pandemic because they hadn't tested positive for the virus. Margaret learned that Harold Benson had been found in his flat after several days. No one had known he'd passed away. The paper called it natural causes. Margaret thought of the chessboard sitting in his living room, the game unfinished since last March. The isolation was cruel in its subtlety. It didn't strike suddenly, like the virus. It seeped in, day after day, until people stopped noticing the loneliness as something separate from themselves. It became part of their bones, their breath, and then slowly, it wore them out. Margaret might have joined the uncounted dead if it hadn't been for an unexpected knock on her door. It was Nora, masked and standing a few steps back. She held a Tupperware of scones. "I thought you might like these," she said. Margaret took them with trembling hands. That evening, she ate one slowly, savoring every bite. The next day, she called Nora to say thank you, and they talked for half an hour. The day after that, Margaret baked shortbread and left a tin on Nora's porch. It was a small start, but enough to make her open the curtains again in the mornings. She began walking to the corner and back, then to the park. She called Claire every day instead of once a week. The heaviness in her chest lifted slightly, like a window cracked open to let in fresh air. Still, she couldn't stop thinking of the others, the ones no one visited, the ones who never answered the phone again, the ones who had died quietly, not of COVID-19, but because they were alone too long. The world wouldn't list them in the pandemic totals, but Margaret knew they belonged there. She began writing their names in a notebook: Harold, Pauline, Mr. Carter from the grocery store who'd stopped coming in. She wrote down what she remembered of them so they wouldn't disappear entirely. One day, when the crisis was truly over, she planned to tell their stories. Not to frighten, but to remind people that human contact is not a luxury for the elderly. It is as vital as food or medicine. That isolation can be as deadly as any virus, just slower, quieter. Margaret still had days when the silence pressed against her, but she no longer let it swallow her whole. She visited Nora once a week, stood at the gate to talk to passersby, and made herself wave at neighbors she didn't know. The world outside her window was waking up again. But she knew there were many who would never see it, because isolation had already claimed them. And she promised herself that if she could help it, she would never let another person in her reach fade away unseen, unheard, untouched.